Robert laughed as he signed the divorce papers. It wasn't joy. It was pure arrogance. The kind of laugh that comes from someone who thinks they've already won the game before it's even started. For 10 years, he'd watched his business empire grow from a cramped Detroit apartment to a multi-million-dollar company in Grand Rapids. But in his version of success, his wife Karen was just background music, never the composer of the symphony they'd built together. She'd worked 2 jobs while he chased his dreams. She'd kept their accounts from going red while he painted visions of grandeur. She'd been his silent partner in every sense except the one that mattered, legally. And now, sitting across from her in a sterile Brooklyn courtroom, Robert held what he believed was his golden ticket, a prenuptial agreement that would leave Karen with nothing but memories. He clicked his pen with satisfaction, signed his name with a flourish, and leaned back like a man closing the deal of his life. The prenup was ironclad, he thought, bulletproof, his insurance policy against losing everything he'd built himself. But then Judge Halverson lifted the document to the light, squinted through his glasses, and spoke 5 words that shattered Robert's confidence like glass. This document is not valid. The courtroom fell silent. Time seemed to pause as those words echoed off the cold tiles and fluorescent lights. For the first time that morning, Robert's smug smile vanished. The paper he'd believed would protect his empire was about to become his downfall. Everyone expected Karen to walk away with crumbs. That's how these stories usually end, right? The wife gets the leftovers while the husband drives off into the sunset with his new life and old money. But this time was different. This time, the woman who'd been written out of her own story was about to reclaim her narrative. Karen didn't flinch when Robert smirked across the courtroom. She didn't react when he winked as if to say, "You've already lost." She just sat there, hands folded, while her attorney and lifelong friend Tamika Monroe began laying out the truth. Email by email, receipt by receipt, photograph by photograph. There was Karen speaking to investors while Robert took credit. Bank statements showing her money funding their first shipments, handwritten notes in her signature, passwords she'd created, that spreadsheet Robert had once mocked her for organizing, now critical evidence of her contributions. Judge Halverson began taking notes. He paused twice to reread sections of the prenup. Tamika's voice never wavered as she methodically dismantled Robert's case. Every piece of evidence chipped away at his confidence. First his knee started bouncing, then his jaw clenched. Eventually he couldn't even look at Karen anymore. But here's what nobody realized. Not even Robert. The prenup wasn't just flawed, it was never legally valid in the first place. Not when they signed it in 2011. Not when they revised it in 2014. Not once in all their years of marriage had it ever been properly filed with the county clerk's office. It was nothing more than a piece of paper with signatures, legally meaningless. Let's go back to where it all began. Karen and Robert started as 2 broke kids in Brooklyn with nothing but dreams and a secondhand coffee maker that barely worked. They lived in a 1-bedroom walk-up with no elevator, no air conditioning, just ambition and hope. Robert was the dreamer, always planning the next big move. Karen was the realist, careful with money, deliberate with decisions. When Robert started sketching business plans in the back of Karen's old college notebook, she was right there beside him. She typed the proposals, she made the first calls, she stayed up learning the difference between gross profit and net revenue. While Robert called himself the founder, Karen was the one keeping the lights on, literally. She worked at a diner during the day, took temp jobs at night, all while handling the business side that Robert couldn't be bothered with. When their first client came through, it was Karen who sent the invoice. When Robert forgot to prepare for crucial pitches, Karen pulled all-nighters editing presentations. But her name never appeared on any official documents. "It's just paperwork, babe," Robert would say. "It'll complicate the taxes. Don't worry, we're in this together." So Karen trusted him. She believed that love was enough, that building something together meant they were true partners. She gave up a job offer from a Chicago publishing house to stay in New York. She turned down graduate school to be available for late-night brainstorming sessions and early morning investor meetings. She believed her recognition would come eventually, that one day she'd be seen not just as Robert's wife, but as his equal partner. Instead, the opposite happened. As the money started flowing, Robert began shutting her out. The meetings that once happened in their living room moved to offices she didn't have keys to. She stopped getting copied on emails. Her opinions were no longer sought. When she asked about her future role, Robert smiled and said, "You're good at keeping things stable. Let me focus on growth." So she did what she'd always done. She kept things stable until everything cracked. Until the thick envelope arrived, delivered by a man who couldn't meet her eyes. The divorce papers that would test whether 10 years of invisible partnership meant anything at all. Brooklyn Family Court looked exactly like what it was. A place where dreams went to die and marriages became case numbers. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like something unresolved, even though it was summer. The room felt cold, clinical, final. Robert entered like he was closing a business deal, not ending a marriage. Navy suit, polished shoes, that same cologne Karen had given him one Christmas. Now too sweet, too familiar, too painful. His attorney, Martin Levin, followed behind with the kind of smug confidence that comes from winning too many battles like this one. Karen sat quietly with Tamika, dressed simply but carrying herself with quiet strength. Her hands shook slightly, but her resolve was steel. She didn't look at Robert, not once, though she could feel his eyes searching for weakness that would never come. When the bailiff called Fields versus Fields, Judge Whitaker entered with the expression of someone who'd seen every variation of this story and was tired of seeing it again. He scanned the room like a chess master studying the board before making his opening move. Martin Levin stood first, his voice smooth as silk. Your Honor, we're here to finalize the dissolution of marriage between my client, Mr. Robert Fields, and the respondent, Mrs. Karen Fields. There's a prenuptial agreement signed by both parties that clearly outlines asset division. We request enforcement of its terms, which award all current and future holdings to Mr. Fields. Karen felt her throat tighten, but Tamika's reassuring touch reminded her she wasn't alone. When Tamika rose to speak, her voice was steady as bedrock. Your Honor, we're challenging the validity of this prenuptial agreement. The document presented today was never legally executed. It lacks proper witness signatures. It lacks notarization. And most critically, we have confirmation from the county clerk's office that this agreement was never filed. Not at the time of marriage, not afterward. Legally, it's as enforceable as a grocery list. The room went dead silent. Even the bailiff stood straighter. Levin smirked and flipped through his folder. Whether filed or not, the intention is clear. Both parties signed it. Mrs. Fields knew what she was agreeing to. Tamika didn't flinch. Intent does not override law, Mr. Levin. New York State requires proper execution of prenuptial agreements. No notary, no witness, no filing. That isn't an oversight. That's failure to comply with legal standards. Karen remembered signing that document at their kitchen table without a lawyer, without discussion. Robert had said it was routine. It just keeps things simple. You trust me, right? Now that same simplicity had become the crack in his armor. Judge Whitaker didn't respond immediately. Instead, he reached for the document, lifted it with one hand, brought it closer to his face, and held it up to the light. He didn't say a word, just held that piece of paper up to the light like he was examining a counterfeit bill. And in that moment, everyone knew the truth was about to come out. When Karen was called to testify, her voice started thin, the kind that comes from holding too much inside for too long. But as she spoke, the words found their rhythm, the memories their power. When Robert started the company, she said, we were 2 paychecks from eviction. I worked mornings at a diner, nights for a temp agency. I used my savings to buy his domain name. I found the accountant, sat through the legal paperwork. I wasn't behind the scenes. I was the scene. She paused, looked straight ahead, then continued. I emailed the first investor. I prepped the materials. I followed up until they agreed to meet. During the pitch, I sat quietly in the corner, not because I had nothing to say, but because Robert asked me to let him take the lead. When the check cleared, he kissed my forehead and said, we did it. I believed him. Tamika then walked the court through exhibit after damning exhibit. Email chains from 2013 with Karen's name in the sender field, corresponding directly with investors, photographs of Karen at trade shows, launch parties, ties, standing beside Robert under company banners. Bank records showing transfers from their joint account to cover business expenses before the company even had its own bank account. Karen's sister Yvette testified with trembling voice but unwavering conviction. My sister gave up everything for him. She turned down scholarships to stay close. She cared for his parents when they were sick. She handled his business and their bills. When he started pulling away, she thought it was stress. But I saw it. I watched him erase her in real time. Robert shifted uncomfortably. The smirk was gone. His lawyer scribbled frantically, but Robert didn't even look at the notes. The defense tried to fight back. The company CFO testified that he'd never seen Karen in board meetings, never saw her on formal correspondence. But Tamika was ready. She pulled up a meeting agenda from 2015 with Kay Fields listed as an attendee, complete with handwritten notes verified by a handwriting analyst. One by one, Robert's pillars cracked. His eyes darted around the room. His knee bounced uncontrollably. And then Tamika reached into her briefcase one final time. She pulled out a single page in a clear sleeve, placed it carefully on the table, and slid it toward the judge. "This," she said, "is a certified response from the county clerk's office." Judge Whitaker adjusted his glasses and lifted the document. The room held its breath as his eyes scanned the page. Slow, careful, deliberate. He didn't react immediately, just gave a small nod as if confirming what he'd already suspected. "This," he said, holding the paper between two fingers, "is a certified response from the Kings County Clerk's office." He looked directly at Robert. "There is no record of this prenup ever being filed. Not in 2014, not in any year since." A quiet murmur rippled through the courtroom. Robert leaned forward, brows pinched, mouth slightly open like he hadn't heard correctly. His attorney jumped up. "Your Honor, there must be a mistake. We have a signed copy. Perhaps there was a clerical issue." The judge cut him off cold. "The county confirms there was no filing. Additionally, this document lacks notarization and witness signatures. Intent does not excuse failure to comply with the law. A prenuptial agreement is not enforceable without proper execution and filing. That is not a technicality. That is the law." In a voice too loud for the room, Robert interrupted. "Come on, this isn't fair. She didn't build that company. I did. She handled emails. She supported me. That's it. You can't just..." "Enough." The word cut through the air like a blade. Judge Whitaker didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. That single word carried the full weight of authority and consequence. What came next erased every ounce of confidence from Robert's face. Judge Whitaker looked down at his bench, then back up. His voice carried the weight of justice long overdue. Based on the evidence presented, including financial records, testimony, and the failure to execute and file the prenuptial agreement in accordance with New York state law, this court finds in favor of the respondent, Mrs. Karen Fields. The silence that followed was absolute. No whispers, no papers shuffling, no chairs creaking. The business known as Field Solutions, along with the marital home and majority of shared assets, shall be awarded to Mrs. Fields. Mr. Fields will retain one vehicle and receive a division of remaining joint savings consistent with equitable distribution. For a long moment, nobody moved. Robert sat completely still. The color drained from his face. The confidence was gone. The calculation behind his eyes was gone. What remained was pure confusion, like someone trying to replay a game they'd already lost. Karen let out the faintest exhale. Not relief, not triumph, just breath. The first full one she'd taken all day. Her hands were no longer clasped beneath the table, but rested gently now, palms open, steady. The judge signed the final order with slow, deliberate strokes. Then he looked directly at Karen, not through her, not around her, but at her. "You may be seated, Mrs. Fields," he said. And with that, the gavel dropped. The courtroom emptied slowly, but Robert didn't move. He just sat there, staring at the spot where the prenup used to be. The document he thought would guarantee his victory, his safety net, his silence clause. Now it was just invalid paper. Karen stood quietly. She didn't look at him, not to gloat, not to explain. There was nothing left to say. She gathered her bag, the same worn leather one she'd carried to every investor meeting, every grocery store run, every late-night emergency during his years of building a company on her back. She walked past him, past the benches, past the bailiff, through the heavy courtroom doors, and into the bright Brooklyn daylight. She didn't cry, she didn't smile. But something had fundamentally changed. The way her shoulders no longer curled inward, the way her spine aligned itself again. The quiet strength of someone who had once been erased and now had it all returned. Sometimes justice doesn't come with flashing lights or headlines. Sometimes it comes with a pen and a judge who actually reads the fine print. And sometimes it comes with finally being seen after years of being invisible. The woman who'd been written out of her own story had just reclaimed every page.